Hi guys, I'm Seymour Duncan. Glad you made it here to Seymour Duncan. What I'm doing right now, I'm hand winding an antiquity pickup. We have many models that we built. I always like the term antiquity. So I started making pickups that would look like they're maybe 50 years old already. And you can see that we do use all the correct materials, you know, from the bottom plate, nickel silvers, and the wood spacer, and the special butyrate plastic. There's all different versions of butyrate, and we use the correct version. Most of our wire are pretty much custom made for us, the plain enamel that we use on this particular pickup. And basically I started being very interested in playing guitar when I was a young kid. My uncle, Howard Duncan, who's the brother of my dad, played. He had an old Martin acoustic, and he showed me my first cowboy chords. And it was a D chord, and an A chord, and a C chord, and a G chord. So every day I would go after school over to his house and pick up his guitar and just practice every day, every day, every day. And a few months later, I had a Sears Silvertone catalog, and I wanted to get a certain kind of guitar out of it. And there was a real cool guitar that looked like a Les Paul, had gold sparkle on it, it was black, had like a cream binding, and a simulated ebony fingerboard. I marked it in the catalog, and so my first Christmas, I was 12 years old, came along, and I saw the box, and I opened it up, and I was in shock. You know, my family, instead of getting me a guitar, they bought me an accordion. And because my family, we were watching a Lawrence Welk show, and every week I would watch it and watch a guitar player by the name of Neil Levang. Neil Levang was a great guitar player with Buddy Merrill, and I'd watch Neil get up, and he would play a Tele or a Jazz Master or a Strat, and do instrumentals like Ghost Riders in the Sky, Wheels, Calcutta, and so that was the first guy I actually really saw. And then there was James Burton with Ricky Nelson, and he was such a great influence, and he was playing a Telecaster. And then over the years, my family took me to Steel Pier in Atlantic City, where I first was introduced to Les Paul and Mary Ford. And they took me to a matinee during a Saturday on Steel Pier, and I went in and sat in the front row, and all of a sudden I hear dear, 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 How High the Moon was playing. It was Les Paul and Mary Ford, and the curtains opened up. Then after the show, my uncle took me backstage and introduced me to Les, and that was like the thrill of a lifetime. I mean, it was the first like professional I ever saw in person. And I asked him all these questions about the pickups and about the pulverizer on his guitar and everything. So that was such a big influence to me. So the following year, I was 13, I finally got my Sears Silvertone guitar. So that was the start of it. And every day I would play and practice and practice. And I was listening to all the great guitar players back then, you know, with Bill Doggett, you know, and there was he was a Hammond player, and he had a song called Honky Tonk, which I thought was great. And then there was a great guitar player by the name of Dwayne Eddy, who had many hit instrumentals and was touring with the Dick Clark Show. And then there was another great guitar player by the name of Lonnie Mack, had a record called Memphis and Wham, and he was just an incredible player, played a flying V through a Magnetone amplifier. And then probably my all-time favorite band was a band called The Ventures with Don Wilson, you know, Bob Bogle, Noki Edwards, that played bass but later played lead guitar. So for me, having that as an influence, I had my homework set out for me, because I'd buy the records and then I would learn as much as I could from each record. So for me, I was quite thrilled to later in life have a chance to meet all these great artists that I grew up listening to. So that started that whole thing, and then I had been playing around. We toured with the Shirelles when I was quite young. And then and I ended up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I was playing with a group there. And then we traveled all over the Midwest, and then I started meeting all these other guitar players from up in Chicago. I met Jim McCarty from the Detroit Wheels, who was another great guitar player. Cal Collins was in Cincinnati. Bill Bartlett was in a band called the Lemon Pipers, and he had a record called the Green Tambourine. And so him and I would hang out all the time, and we'd trade guitar notes and everything. Then during that time, I was working for Dodd Music Center, and I met, when I first got to town, I met this guy playing drums who just had a great voice. I mean, I was so inspired by him, and it was a guy by the name of Adrian Ballou. And Adrian and I had been very good friends. I moved to New York, working with a band called the Sidekicks for a short time, and I was basically their like manager, tour manager. And then John Spirit, the drummer, broke his ankle, and I ended up being the drummer with the band, and then I would play guitar every once in a while, so that was fun. And then just traveling, you know, around, when I was playing Wildwood, this guitar player would come down all the time and show me his new Les Paul, or I'd go see his guitar collection and stuff that he had, and it was Todd Rundgren. So he was playing in Wildwood, a place called Second of Autumn. So I had all these great people that I would meet, and I sat in with the Flamingos at a club in Wildwood. One of the other first bands I met were the Fendermen, who had a record called Mule Skinner Blues. And it was, if you ever get that album by the Fendermen, the original album, listen to the guitar work on it with Jim Sundquist, and he was a great guitar player. And another one of my influences was George Tomsko with a band called the Fireballs. And the Fireballs had a lot of instrumental hits out, Torquay and Bulldog, and one called Quite a Party. Then during that time I worked for CBS Television. I had a great time working for television. I worked for Scripps Howard Broadcasting, and then I became a technician. I was in the ham radio. Then I did a show with Joe Walsh, and Joe Walsh and I were the only guys in Cincinnati at the time that were playing Yardbird songs. This was around like 1966, 67. And we were doing Train Kept A-Rollin' and I'm a Man and all these songs. We were playing in the local clubs in Cincinnati. During the week, I'd be working back in the television station. And then I did some shows, and I backed up a bunch of artists that came on the show. Jerry Reed was there. He borrowed one of my Telecasters at one time, and one of my deluxe reverbs for a show he was doing. And then this one guy said, "Man, you should be playing," you know, and it was Roy Buchanan. And so I went to Europe with Roy Buchanan in 1973, and the end of 72, beginning of 73. And then hooked up with him, and then I went to Polydor Records with him, and I met a guy named Jay Rich, who was his manager, and they got me set up with a guy named Wayne Bickerton. And Wayne says, "Well, we have an artist that needs a guitar player," and his name was Chris Harley, and his stage name was Chris Rainbow, and he was a singer and songwriter that was, to me, so incredible. You know, he would sing 4-part harmony just like the Beach Boys and add 5 and 6 parts. You know, the guy was absolutely amazing.